Hi, everyone. It's V. Spear, the Director of Impact here at the James Beard Foundation. So excited to have you all with us today as we have two incredible guests who are going to be talking about food, farmers, and COVID-19. First up, we have Representative Chellie Pingree, who, for those of you who don't know her, you haven't been listening to the James Beard Foundation because we've had her on a million times. She was part of our Chef Action Summit. She's one of the most forward voices as it relates to farmers and the restaurant community. And so we're so excited to have you. She herself was a farmer and a small business owner before becoming the state senator and then congresswoman from the state of Maine. In addition to her political life, she co-owns and manages the Nebo Lodge, a bed and breakfast and restaurant in North Haven. And as if that wasn't already enough work to do, she also owns Turner Farm, a diversified, organically certified farm. She's been an advocate in Congress for reforming federal policy to better support the diverse range of American agriculture. And in 2017, she won a James Beard Leadership Award for her national leadership in food system reform. So welcome, Representative Pingree. We're excited to have you. Joining her is Chef Abra Berens, who is a chef, a former farmer, and a writer. In 2009, she co-founded the Bare Knuckle Farm in Northport, Michigan, where she farmed and cooked for 8 years. After farming, she returned to the kitchen full-time because we can't ever get out of the kitchen, can we, Chef? It's like, you can't keep them out. Opening and helming the cafe Local Foods in Chicago, Illinois. And in 2017, she left that position to return back to the Mitten State and join the team at Grainer Farm in Three Oaks, where she combines her love of farms, restaurants to create one-of-a-kind dinners on the farm, celebrating the best of Southwest Michigan's diverse food agriculture. So welcome, Chef. I'm so excited to have you. As we have with all of the webinars up to date, and I think we're on our 25th or 26th one in just a few weeks, this is meant to be a fun conversation. We are in a great position in the fact that we have really authentic, beautiful relationships with some of the smartest people in the nation right now. And they're willing to just show up here and just talk peer to peer with you about what's working for them, what they see happening in their neck of the woods, and how that may be something that could be of use to you where you're living and working. So while very educated and awesome and thoughtful, what is going on in Michigan or Maine might not be legal in your state. So definitely check with your state laws and make sure that if we give a suggestion, that's something that's going to work for you. And if you hear something you like that they're doing, know that a lot of these have led to better conversations with your own local governments. In Maryland in particular, we were able to take what was happening with some of the distilleries and have folks advocate for that to be going on in other states, just things that they liked. So this is a great place to share some ideas, but again, everything we say can change tomorrow, of course, and we're just talking about what's working for us. Now, we want this to be really interactive, and we got a ton of questions from you guys ahead of time, so I've got those here, and we'll be going through those interview style. There's no presentation today, so it will be a lot more conversational than what we've had in the past, which I'm really thrilled for. I think we all need a break from lectures, right? But if you have another question or you didn't get to send one in already, you can interact with us by filling out on the control panel. There is a little area that says questions. That comes to me and Emily, who is auditing this call, as well as Ashley Koziak. And so we will make sure that we get as many of those questions through to the panelists as possible. We may save some of the questions to the end if they're not on topic to what we're speaking about at the exact moment. So don't get discouraged. Know that we have heard and seen your question, and we'll get to it as best we can. This webinar will be recorded, so if somebody gives out a website or a name or something like that and you miss it, you'll be able to go back and check it out again. And if you're having any technical difficulties, you can message us using the webinar toolbar, and Emily will do what she can to troubleshoot. Luckily, Emily is also one of the greatest people that walk this earth and a technical genius, at least in my mind. I can like barely turn the computer on. So I'm very lucky to have her and excited that she'll be looking out for us as we continue to go forward. So now that we've got all of that out of the way, I'm excited to get started with our conversation and just find out, maybe starting with Representative Pingree, what's happening in Maine? Just like, what's your day like right now?
Well, I think it's safe to say that none of us have ever lived through anything like this, and every day is kind of an unprecedented day. All members of Congress work remotely, so everyone in my office, whether they're in Maine or Washington, we get on a phone call in the morning and we're all at home after we've discussed the last television show that we watched to, distract ourselves a little bit. we get right to the work. And honestly, these are busier days than most of us ever experience in Congress. We're luckily on wonderful calls like this much of the time, or we're just connecting with our constituents to find out, the issues with hospitals, with testing, with small businesses, with fishermen, with farmers, and everything else. So it's an unprecedented time. Obviously, we are just extremely concerned about everybody's health and safety. So I hope all of you are staying safe in health. And certainly from the farming and restaurant sector, we have a lot of challenges going on, and we are doing our best every day to try to help people figure out, is there a loan program? Is there a kind of unemployment that works for you? Is there a way for farmers to connect online? And I'm sure many things that we'll be talking about, but it's like nothing we've ever experienced. And most of us are doing a better job trying to, learn to use technology and connect with each other in many ways. And some of that is fun, not having to get dressed up to go to work every day. And others of it, a huge challenge, and not the same as being able to give a family member a hug or, see people person to person. So I think it's like kind of everybody else.
Everybody's in that same boat. Yeah, it doesn't matter who you are or where you are, everybody's feeling those same kind of like personal struggles and in just the ways of connecting with people in the way we're used to. And Chef, for you, what's happening up there in Michigan? You're on both the restaurant and the farm side right now.
Yeah, so our restaurant community is going through the same hurdles that everyone is nationally, closed for in-store dining, curbside's available, things like that. And we're at Grainer, we're in sort of a unique position because we have a really diversified business in that we are first and foremost organic vegetable and small grain farm. And so that's our primary output. And then what I do is I manage the dining program, which both mitigates a lot of food waste on the farm to make these dinners that are for 24 people at a time. So they're very small. It's one set menu. So we don't face some of the same hurdles that a standalone restaurant would have. And what we're seeing right now, and what I've heard is true across the country, that there's a huge uptick in the interest and demand for local produce, and to be able to have access to those things, an uptick in demand for CSA memberships, things like that. We're trying to mill some of the wheat berries that we have as fast as we can so that we can get flour onto the market. And that's really been our focus as the dinners are sort of taking a backseat to that right now.
Yeah, and I know it's something that you both have advocated so much for, is this idea of local farmers feeding their local communities. And now more than ever, that seems to be, in some cases, the only way that folks are really going to be able to get access to the food that they're used to, is to maybe pay a little bit more and be going to their local butcher or their local farm. Tell me a little bit about what you've seen in terms of that working, in a sense. Like, have local small farms seen an uptick in people being interested the same way folks like Imperfect or Fresh Direct or Amazon had previously kind of stolen some of those sales from people? What are you seeing? Maybe Chef or
Oh, go ahead. No, let the chef answer.
We certainly are. Yeah, I think that we are in a unique part of Michigan that has a lot of, we're very close to the lake, so we have a strong tourist economy and a lot of second home population. So a lot of people have moved out of some bigger cities and are now here. So we're really seeing some of the same level of interest that we have in July and August right now. We have an honor system farm stand until our season really gets going, which we're going to move up this year. And the line for the farm stand has been crazy demand, selling out in half an hour, and I'm seeing that with other vegetable farmers in the area. There's a lot of demand in the sense that we have a couple of, we grow a lot of fruit in this part of the state. And so fruit growers who normally sell only wholesale to restaurants and grocery stores are really looking for an outlet for that. And to be able to, Abby Klug is a fruit grower that's just up the road from me. And she was able to pivot her business from restaurants to a 250 member fruit CSA that'll start in May. So it's things like that we're seeing the interest. And I think that comes both from, wanting to have some security in their food, that, I think there's some anxiety about going to stores and seeing empty shelves, but also it seems like people really are thinking about where their dollars can do the most good. And so that's really that's an argument I think both of us have been making for years. And so to see that suddenly jump to the forefront of people's minds is really wonderful, and really wonderful to see people thinking, what can I be doing as they're safe at home.
Yeah. And Representative Pingree, as a farmer and a small business owner yourself, how has that experience influenced your perspective on the ways that DC is handling the COVID-19 crisis?
Well, it's been very helpful for me the entire time I've been in Congress, because anytime you're making a policy, whether it's around food safety or how we subsidize, big farmers instead of small farmers, or what's wrong with the food system, you learn a lot over the years, just basically like the lack of availability of slaughterhouses and infrastructure, and the challenges farmers have just making ends meet, or meeting food safety requirements if you're selling directly to the public. So for each thing that comes across our desk around public policy, it's just great to know firsthand exactly what happens. And it's also great to have a regular involvement with a farm, even though I'm not able to be there all the time, and I depend on a lot of wonderful people to manage it. But still, it's sort of this, it's a contrast to what we do. During this particular moment in time, I think, many of the things that the chef mentioned are forefront for us. State of Maine is a small farm to medium-sized farm state. We don't have a lot of commodities. But so many of those farmers have been affected, and including the small farm that I have, on some of these challenges. If you're used to either having a restaurant that you open up, or if you sold directly to the public through a farm stand, how do you do it online and make deliveries? And then for many of the farms in our state who were selling into the food service, whether it was local schools or restaurants, or this whole other supply chain that's sort of fallen apart or doesn't exist if restaurants and if schools are closed, restaurants can't open. There's been a rapid shift to how do we go direct to consumers, just as you were mentioning the fruit farmer. And I think it's absolutely true that the public really wants to be engaged. How do I help those local farmers? How do I support the rural economy? But, how do we do that in a safe way? And if you were a farm that didn't have a whole internet site figured out for online ordering, which doesn't happen overnight, or you didn't have an easy way to take SNAP benefit cards, there's a lot of hurdles, a lot of lack of infrastructure, a lot of lack of processing. You mentioned the wheat shortage, and we would love to have more capacity in milling, and the small availability in our state is backed up for weeks. So it does help shine a light on how far we've come from a food system that both works but has accessible infrastructure. And while that's a huge challenge right now, and we're really worried that farmers won't be able to survive it, or restaurants will be able to stay open, it gives us a whole new set of examples, in a sense, to make it even more clear to our colleagues why we have to invest some of this COVID-19 funding, and the massive amounts of money that are available now through the USDA. We've really been fighting to make sure that they go to farmers who sell to local markets. They go to people who need to build up the infrastructure, and that's not over now. We have a lot of work to do to keep doing that.
Yeah, a quick follow-up question on that. There's been some talk about essential farming versus non-essential farming. Do you see us being able to free up some of these ideas around what a non-essential farm is now that the shortages are happening?
It's a good question. I think we definitely have to step back and re-examine our entire food system, and that's something that Congress has been completely unwilling to do. In my tenure, and long before, the Farm Bill, which comes up every 5 years, is really meant to be an analysis of the entire system. How we feed people who are hungry, how we support farmers in getting an adequate price, and how we have all the infrastructure that we need. And we just don't do that. And as much as there's been an outcry about shifting some of the funding from big commodity farmers to the diversity of farmers and small to medium-sized farmers, it just hasn't been able to happen. And again, I don't like to look at a silver lining in something that's as catastrophic as this.
Of course.
But if we try to figure out what we can use as an example to help people see it differently, in many ways this is happening in people's minds overnight. You hear about huge hog slaughter facilities that have to shut down, and farmers who are killing healthy hogs because they can't take them to the slaughterhouse. And then we're asking people to go back in there who are going to be sick on the job and unsafe. And, this is a catastrophe, but that's how our whole system is designed, to have everything, the hog is raised just in time. It's got to get on this truck. It's got to be there. There's got to be the capacity, as opposed to, things that are done locally in your area, and you have much more latitude, and we can really look at it differently. And I've been pleased to see that many of my colleagues on the Agriculture Committee and in our regular conversations with the USDA, with ourselves, are saying like, whoa, let's step back here and rethink this. And, I've been in Congress for more than 10 years, and often I'm a lone voice. So this is, and also let's just say, coupled with the public, seeing exactly the same thing and saying, I don't like what I'm hearing, and restaurant owners who are a hugely powerful voice and really have the ability to change how we procure food, being engaged in it too. So it gives me a little bit of hope.
Yeah.
I have
And
a
just
question. I'm sorry, what constitutes a non-essential farm? I'm not familiar with that.
I can't answer.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It was on my question list. I think it has to do with maybe commodity goods or flowers versus
like ethanol maybe, or something. Okay.
eating ethanol, stuff like that.
I think it's, and it may be related to this most recent action of the president, in a sense, to say like, slaughterhouses are essential. We're going to keep them open without regard to safety of the workers, I don't want to be trivial about it. It's a really complex situation, and farmers for many, many years have been told this is the system you have to be in, and this is how it works. And many people were just adapting their farm to the way things work, but we've clearly had over consolidation of both farms and of processing industry, and people have been working in unsafe conditions for a long time. And all these things, I think, are catching up to us. We just have to look at them differently.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit, and the folks who are watching at home who may not be aware, we've touched on just briefly, and we will get more deep into it later, the meat crisis we're potentially facing with either the workers being too sick to participate, or the timing being off, the whole distribution system being off. Can you talk a little bit about the Prime Act, and if that's something that we would be able to push through at this point in time? That question from Dusky Estes.
Great. Well, I certainly hope so, because that's an issue I've been working on for a while. And it really it's our way of trying to deal with the accessibility of having more slaughterhouses around the country. And I think for many states, Michigan and Maine are good examples, but in many places, you've got this growing movement of small to medium-sized farms that aren't producing, thousands and thousands of animals, but on a reasonable scale. And people are desperate to buy locally grown food, organically grown food, pasture-raised beef, just a whole variety of things that are really important. But I was chatting about it earlier, and on my extremely small farm, the day the piglets are born, we have to get a reservation at a slaughterhouses that is several hours drives away. It's complicated to haul pigs that distance, and we're just lucky we have access to somewhere to go. But in many places, there is no such thing. And so it's our way to make some of the federal regulations work better. There are state licensed slaughterhouses and federally licensed slaughterhouses, and we're just trying to make it possible to access more of the capacity of the state licensed slaughterhouses, which are virtually the same. But sometimes you can't, have your meat certified there and then, ship it online or sell it in a restaurant, or there's a whole variety of complications. So, and interestingly, my co-sponsor in this is Representative Massey of Kentucky, who's extremely conservative on many, many issues, but he and I are, sort of in lockstep around ability of farmers to sell their products. He, he grows his own animals, lives off the grid. I live in a off the grid house and raise animals. And, we have this coming together around these ideas. And we co-sponsor bills. We have another one around raw milk and access to that, and sort of getting more, not having to fight state to state on how all these laws work. So those are capacity infrastructure issues. And, 50 years ago in a state like Maine, and probably in Michigan, there was no problem finding a slaughterhouse. I mean, maybe I should say 75 years, but, or a canning facility or a small mill, it just gave huge opportunities for farmers, not only to sell fresh and direct, but to have processed, to have a greater diversity of crops. And, that's what consumers want. And much of the opposition on a bill like the Prime Act has been from well, we sometimes call it big meat. So, the big entities that represent, a very industrialized meat system. And I understand that's become an important component of how people access food, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't have this diversity of ways you can access food, and that we shouldn't be putting equal support into, local farms and local access.
Yeah, and it sounds like this is going to be a place where we'll maybe be able to make some strides right away and do those things just because of the meat crisis. They'll be forced to reopen those opportunities. Chef, I know that you do a lot of collaborating with restaurateurs, having been an executive chef in the past and now being a farmer and chef. Where do you see opportunity for, everywhere all the restaurants and chefs are sort of shut down, or they're running a relief kitchen, or they're doing takeout? What's something that they can be doing with a local farm, especially as we come into season right now, to better their price point, but also just work together, maybe outside the system?
I think that so much of these solutions is based on relationships. And I think that, Representative Pingree was talking about the consolidation of farms. And I think that for more and more people, chefs and restaurateurs included, they don't have daily interactions with farmers. And so it's hard to help solve problems across industries if you can't empathize with what those hurdles are. And so I would say that the best way to kind of figure out some of those collaborations and ways to support is by simply asking, like, what do you need? And I think that that's something where right now, because all of our business models are upended, we're in a unique position to look at that and say, okay, maybe I can talk to this local grower, or also the distributors who are, somebody who's not the sort of flashy, sexy farmer, sexy chef. They're the middleman between them, but those are viable businesses. Talking to a distributor and saying, what cheeses are you long on? I can put those on my menu, as opposed to seeking out the cheese that's in my mind as being the best one that I want. And so I think simply asking that question of your suppliers and saying, hey, what do you need us to sell for you? Because as Representative was saying, the demand is out there. And so if you are a restaurant that is pivoted to doing this amazing service of providing groceries for people, people will buy a cheese that you're saying as a chef, like, I believe in this cheese, or it's great with this jam, or whatever it is. And I think that you have the ability to help move those things through. Because I think right now, the idea of stomaching waste seems really unpalatable to people, more so than it has been in the past. And so that's a really unique opportunity, and also a way to say, I think Americans have never really experienced scarcity. I mean, people who don't suffer from food insecurity to start with have not. I don't know a time where shelves are this empty for this long. And even if, like, I don't tend to buy canned vegetables because of my access to fresh stuff, but even being at the grocery store and seeing that was unsettling. And so I think people are thinking about what that means a little bit more than maybe they've ever been able to empathize with in the past, and so might be more open to getting things that they're not as used to and looking up how to use it. And we all have a little bit more time, hopefully, to be able to research a recipe and see, how to make something work.
Yeah, I mean, we've said when chefs made kale cool, which used to just be a garnish before, like, we could really make anything cool, right? I mean, questions. What are you long on? What weird vegetables do you got? Talk to me about it. Like, we're creators, we're makers, and in a time when you're not able to be in your restaurant, the 14 hours a day, like, pumping out the menu that you spent some time on, like, think about that. Like, what's actually local to you, and taking that opportunity. It's such a great self-care moment to educate yourself, to meeting new people, meeting new farmers, understanding new products or things that may be available that you weren't previously understanding of. And to your point, yeah, the mentality of the consumer has changed. I'm going to promise you, the second anybody opens up any kind of restaurant door and it's actually safe, they're going to eat whatever is on that plate, because they're just be glad they don't have to do their own dishes and cook their own food. I think people really know now what goes into putting, together 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. And so we have an advantage in that way of being able to rebuild the restaurant industry for a way that works for us, the people who work in it, and not just being in service to the whims and demands of the consumer, but really like being in partnership with the consumer as to like as an educator and as a creator and as a service person. We have a lot of questions here about food waste in particular. And I know I came from the food waste sector. I was with Hungry Harvest before. We work with Share Strength, obviously, quite a bit. And we hear all these things about how many folks are food insecure and then how much food goes to waste. And it's not always like a one-for-one comparison, because it doesn't take into effect like food deserts or distribution or wealth or any of that kind of stuff. But when you're hearing that farmers are dumping milk, which is something that, you know, is pretty accessible everywhere, or the amount of food waste that's happening because the grocery stores originally were, you know, going a run on fresh produce, and now people don't want to wash it, so all the frozen canned stuff is getting, that feels safer to people. What can we be doing to manage the food waste right now? Maybe start with Representative.
Well, first, I know we're talking about a serious topic, but I do want to say, I think chefs definitely made kale cool, but first you made Brussels sprouts cool. And that was a big deal, because I had like a Norwegian mother growing up and everything was sort of boiled and slimy. And I thought Brussels sprouts were like the worst thing you could ever eat. And then now they're like a potato chip in every restaurant. So
Yes.
Thank you for that. And then
Yes.
kale, of course, too. So yeah, so this is a serious topic, but and it just undoes people, I think, to see these stories about slaughtering animals because of lack of capacity, dumping milk, and we know how many people are lining up at food banks, and it's a chaotic mess, and I don't know how else to describe it, and it's something I think we can tackle on an individual level and certainly on a restaurant level, but from my perspective, we really just have to stand back and re-examine our entire food system. And I think most people understand, particularly people who are in the restaurant business, that we've had two supply chains, and one went to a grocery store or, you know, food co-op or some kind of supply system, and the other went to the food service industry, and that's restaurants and schools and hospitals. And you all know that you buy things in packages that are really different, and it's been shocking to people to find that, you know, so much of our food is sold, you know, milk, it gets sold in big bulk quantities, or you know, 70% of our bacon goes to restaurants, or, you know, 85% of our lobsters go to restaurants, which is a huge issue in Maine. But I mean, we are now understanding these things, and they're packaged in a whole different way. And as simple as it sounds, you just don't turn that around overnight, or you can't come to a you know, a huge food bank and say, like, look, I'm going to give you these big bags of milk, distribute them to people. But we don't have the capacity in most states like ours. We think it would be really great if we could have the capacity to have an ultra high processing facility, and not everybody wants to drink milk out of a box, but the fact is it's a much better way to preserve milk than powdered milk, which we had to drink as a kid and it was terrible. You know, or other ways that just to do this quickly and to have more diversity in the food supply system. But we just don't have that. And, you know, we have just been, you know, we've been kind of shoved into a food system that dealt with, you know, consolidation and big facilities and some of the things we've already talked about. And now we're just seeing this incredible waste, you know, fields and fields of fresh vegetables in Florida being plowed under. And I mean, I will say that, you know, from, you know, the side of a member of the Agriculture Committee, we have really been frustrated with the Department of Agriculture, because it is part of their job to quickly come to the forefront on these things and say, okay, how do we redistribute this stuff, and who moves it around? And, you know, if people can sew masks at home to try to meet the need here, which obviously they're not the right masks all the time, but I mean, we can jump ahead and figure out how to do this. But we have just gone for so long moving in this direction and have had so little vision about it. So I think on the individual scale, you know, as restaurant and people who work in the industry, you know, part of it is to seek out, you know, exactly what's out there in your own area that's going to waste, and maybe making contact. You know, just as the chef was saying, like, how do you connect in some of these areas, either with the farmers or the commodities grown in your state, and you know, try to think up yourself or with other groups about how to go about doing it. But, you know, from my perspective, this is a really important moment to stand back and say, you know, it's just disgusting to be the wealthiest country in the world, to be having so many people going hungry right now, and so many people watching food be destroyed, and, you know, not doing it well. The other thing I'll say is that we really mishandle hunger and need in this country. I mean, our perpetual battle in Congress and every farm bill and every year is the reduction of benefits for SNAP. And then we just, try to shove people into food banks and charitable distribution. And there is not the capacity in food banks, and there shouldn't have to be these giant refrigerated warehouses and distribution systems to make sure people get the food that they need. I mean, truly, the SNAP system, which has been around a long time, is the best way for people as individuals to access the food that they want. And you should be able to take it to, any grocery store, any co-op, any farm stand. You should be able to join a CSA. There should be incredible flexibility for using it online. And that's where we should funnel funds to make sure people get the choice of the food that they want and can purchase locally. And, that is 85% of the spending in the Farm Bill every year. So this is not a minor part of what we do in America. And that is a political battle that I know many of you have been involved in. And we need your voices more than ever, because this is stupid. I mean, it's just stupid.
Absolutely. And I think it's great perspective that you lent there, that it's not that these farmers are jerks and they can't get paid, so they're just dumping it. Like, that's not what's happening at all. It entirely has to do with losing their customer base and the cost of, trucking it anywhere. If you can even get a truck to bring it somewhere to have those bags or those, cartons processed, like, it doesn't exist presently. So when we're seeing,
and just to reinforce that, it breaks their heart. I mean, we all know how hard a farmer works, and for most of them, it's just barely break even, or just getting by every year. And so if you've worked that hard and you're dumping your cow, the milk that your cows produce for you, and that you raise the hay and everything else, and even today the heartbreak of those farmers who are slaughtering their animals at a number that you can't even fathom. And honestly, they don't even have the capacity to do that. And I don't want to, get gory about it, but it's really awful to think what they have to go through right now. Yeah. And it's not all their fault.
Right, of course. And Chef, do you have something to add to that about the waste conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that all of those points are things that I think the idea that we've had to food supply systems is really true. And I think Americans who are not in the industry are getting a crash course in what that means. And I do think it reinforces the stereotype. And I don't know if other people feel this way, but I think there's a general perception that, people who are large scale growers do it because they can't figure out a better way to do it, or they're somehow of a different ilk than a small scale farmer. And I just don't think that's true. I think there's always been a financial incentive to grow larger, Earl Butts, to get bigger, get out, all of those things. There's still ripples effects from that. And so to suddenly have to make that pivot, it's not, there has to be a financial incentive to do that. And when it is a packaging thing. And I think it's like just understanding the sheer scale at which a lot of this food is produced, and recognizing that it's not cute, it's not cute to try to move that much milk around. And also that Americans, have a responsibility to say that we've asked for and demanded cheap meat and cheap milk. And so we bear a responsibility there. And I don't know that that's a conversation that any, chef or farmer is really keen to have right now with their community. But it's true. And so, it's one of those things that we were talking earlier about the animals being slaughtered and the rate of meat producers who may go out of business from this. And it's like, yeah, but if people are willing to pay more for a smaller scale producer of pork, then those farmers are not going out of business right now. At least it doesn't seem that way, although there's a bit of a lag probably. But yeah, I think that for me, as much as I'm often championing ways to mitigate waste, right now it's also just about understanding why it's happening, because the waste that's happening now is different than the waste that's happened before. And that's an important thing to understand. And I think Representative Pingree hit the nail on the head saying it guts farmers to have to kill your animals, not only from an emotional standpoint that these are animals that you care for, but also it's fucking fiasco in terms of finances, and like it's hitting it on both ends. And to think that that's not a heavy weight is just preposterous.
Yeah. So what do we do? I mean, I think that we're at that point in the conversation now where people are frustrated, they're hurt, they're scared, they're ornery from being in their houses for over 40 days right now. And we've said we have the time now. And I was going to learn French over the last 40 days, but I didn't do that. So, I mean, like, let's get on it. What can we do? What can citizens do today to help pass legislative efforts that seem so common sense, like the Prime Act, like what is qualifying non-essential farms or whatever the deal is with that? What can somebody do today to demand more common sense as it relates to agriculture? That one's coming right at you, Pingree.
Well, I mean, first off, thank you to the James Beard Foundation. I mean, I appreciate you guys so much, and the way you have, turned, the way you've supported chefs in being activists. So whether that's, engaged in your own state policy or at the federal level, I mean, I know already many of you know about these pieces of legislation or policies. And, now more than ever, we just have to have you speaking up. You come from all over the country. You're represented by a whole spectrum of members of Congress. And one thing I found is that, this isn't a partisan issue. And I have, as I mentioned, I work with people on both sides of the aisle. And the most important thing, the thing that really turns people around in understanding these issues is hearing from all of you, whether it's, small farmers or restaurant owners. You're such a credible voice. You're all engaged in a crisis mode right now, and you're seeing firsthand what these issues are, and you're horrified, or you're not sure if your business will survive or if you'll be able to get supply when you're trying to open again or right now. So, I mean, I just think this is the most important time now than ever, just to be on the front lines and talking to people. Let's face it, members of Congress are just, we're sitting home on Zoom and, making phone calls and trying to answer all of you. And I just think, being a persistent voice and firsthand, like why this is a disaster for you and why you see it as a bigger disaster for the country. We just, you could be a big help. I mean, we've got good ideas out there, and, we have huge proposals that we're trying to get into the next round of the, whatever the next CARES package is. And we're happy to share through the Beard Foundation what I'm getting my colleagues to sign on to. And it's, everything from loan forbearance for farmers, but also infrastructure money for many of these things. I'm sorry to say I have a 5-page letter about, every little detail that we think has to get fixed. And, we just need a lot of voices to move it through. So it's not just sort of big agriculture looking at it in a whole different way, or when we get to the other side of this, we just don't go back to the same ways of doing things and patch it all together.
And for folks who are wondering, like, okay, so I'm going to use my voice and I'm going to write in and whatnot, we have a team here that works on political advocacy, and Ashley Koziak, who's on this call, put together something called the Chef Action Toolkit. If you go to jamesbeard.org/relief, and we'll put that up at the end, and Emily's going to put it in the chat here too. There is a toolkit in there that tells you as a chef or restaurateur, a member of the public, exactly like some sample language on what you can say, how to find your representative, how frequently you should write to them. All of that kind of information is laid out for you. You're welcome to use that or adapt that however works for your own personal voice, but we did put that together for y'all with the help of a lot of our friends on the Hill. To make sure that it gets through, because there's nothing more frustrating than trying to start a letter. And so we wanted to make sure that we gave you at least a good template to get started, and then you put your own color in there. You put as many different crazy words as you want, all the colorful words, all the chef words. I'm here for all of it. They need to hear it. Turning from we focused a lot of this conversation on the American population as it relates to chefs, restaurateurs, farmers, and folks on this thing. There's I want to spend the next couple minutes here talking through the issues that are facing our migrant communities and immigrant farmers. In particular in Michigan, we know this is a huge piece of the labor force as it relates to getting our food into the system. What are we seeing in terms of relief for migrant farmers right now?
That's not something Representative should go, because I don't have as much impact.
Yeah, I just came off a call before this that was related to healthcare needs and testing, and there are some huge challenges. I mean, number one is I don't have to tell anyone that we're in this horrible period of anti-immigrant status, and we are extremely dependent on a whole variety of people who come from different countries or are here in our own country. And are increasingly marginalized in daily life. So getting people to come, the availability of people coming into the country is severely restricted right now. And this is a huge problem for all of agriculture, from giant operations to small vegetable farmers who depend on the same two, people who came every year from Jamaica or Puerto Rico or anywhere around the world just to help out with that operation. And many of them are almost like family. They've been coming so many years, or people who are already here who are increasingly marginalized. Many of them, potentially undocumented, but that means they don't qualify for all these, support systems that we're trying to keep out there right now, or they're just in a really difficult position when it comes to trying to get a test or anything else. But in the immediate term, in terms of migrant workers, one of the challenges we were just talking about in a recent phone call of mine was for H-2A workers who come into the country, and if you're in a state or in coming into the country, you have to quarantine for 2 weeks. That can be virtually impossible depending on where you enter the country, and if you can't get directly to the state or the farm that you're used to working on. Many people are living in adequate housing, so we have to make sure that housing is available, that isn't, people lined up in bunks, and these don't turn into just breeding grounds for people to not be able to stay healthy, or if you have to quarantine, where do you safely land for 2 weeks? And then also our testing system. We wouldn't have to have these strict quarantine rules if we had testing systems that people could use. And that's just a national disaster right now. And we certainly, we put another $25 billion in the most recent package, and we're going to keep doing it. But the lack of federal coordination on testing and availability of supplies is a nightmare in every single state, and that's going to be yet another roadblock for farmers and restaurant owners, who depend on a whole, group of people who are increasingly going to be shoved out of our workforce, and we need them desperately.
Yeah, which brings me to sort of the next point, which is the health restrictions and what the new safety and sanitation guidelines are going to be like for farms, for restaurateurs, for chefs. Chef, what are some things that you're considering doing once you get running with more, bringing more of the public into your space as it relates to upgrading your safety and sanitation? What are some of the things that you think are going to be just non-negotiable for you to feel safe?
I mean, we've talked about not actually going back to full production or full, public access until there's a vaccine. We're in a really privileged position that our business model is diversified, and so we can figure out how to emphasize the other parts of the business that are seeing more demand. I recognize that's not the case for everybody. I think that it'll be things like the amount of disinfectant, how we space things out, can we move into a larger room so that we can, operate at half capacity. But even if we do that, then you've got, if you go to only sets of 2s or sets of 4s, as opposed to, groups, we normally have groups of 6 to 8 who want to come and attend. So it'll be a lot of those sorts of things. And so right now we're primarily focused on the farm store and the online pickup. Again, I don't really see us going back to an in-store pickup until there's, widespread testing, potentially antibody testing, and then also a vaccine. But, maybe those conversations will be harder to have once it's not so nice outside. It'll be hard to manage some of the flow of people in a snowstorm than it is in July or August. So.
Yeah, I know we're coming up on that. And for those of you who missed it, this Monday, we had Ecolab and the American Culinary Federation in, who were talking about PPE that's available for hospitality folks, what some of those expectations will be. Ecolab, an incredible resource, so I suggest you go. We recorded it, so it's where you signed up for this. You'll be able to watch that. And ACF is offering for free to people who watch that recording their new 30-hour updated safety and sanitation class. There's a code that they give at the end. So you just, even if you skip forward to the end and sign up for that class, like there's a lot of information that's going out about how to disinfect, what the new processes will have to be. And unfortunately, they're extremely intense. And, some folks have said, do we, what's the legality or what's the infringement on somebody's personal rights? You have HIPAA laws, but I'm going to say I'm going to take your temperature. My 19-year-old hostess is going to be out there with a face shield running temperatures. Like, that's probably not, I could see you shaking your head already. That's not going to be something that's going to be truly enforceable, and so what do you think it's going to look like over the next couple of months, Representative, as people begin to open up? Will it stay takeout and to-go meals? Is it worth it, kind of, or what do you think is going to happen?
Well, it's such a complicated dialogue, and I know every restaurant has been trying to sort this through. And here in Maine, our governor just yesterday sort of announced her month-by-month guidelines for the summer. And, like many other places in the country, we are extremely dependent on our tourism industry. So for many restaurants, even if they're open year round, they make the bulk of their income in maybe, June through October, or even just July and August. So timing is everything. If you can't open your restaurant back up in July, or people are afraid to come to our state, or our restrictions for coming to our state are so severe. I mean, there are just so many unknowns. But part of the governor's language was around, so what will our standards be? And, some of them are still being developed, but just as you said, some of them may be required in the law, but others might just be for a restaurant owner to protect themselves from liability. And some of it will be around, what's practical. I thought that was a really good example. Like, is everybody going to be okay about having their temperature taken before they go into a restaurant? And then, of course, we've talked to a lot of restaurant owners who, they don't have an outside deck. They can't open up into the parking lot and put tables out there. And, maybe they were just a 30-seat restaurant with all two tops. Who can sit on a two-top anymore? And, how are you going to do all this if you really have to have a 6-foot distance? What if you have a 25-foot bar and you can only put 3 people on it? I mean, we're also dependent on the flow of people and volume and, sales. I just think there are an awful lot of unknowns out there. And some of them I think will be regulated. They'll be in state laws, more likely than federal laws, but then some of them will just be in the practice. And a lot of it will come down to, how do you make sure your customers feel comfortable enough coming back into your restaurant, regardless of what the rules are? And some customers may say, I'm not going to a restaurant unless everyone's wearing a mask and they take your temperature before you come in. And others will say, like, how dare you, And
Well, we did a poll.
a customer has to wear a mask. How do you wear a mask when you're eating? Do you take it on? But I've been hearing a lot of the things, menus can't be reusable. And I mean, I think there will be some things that we can all accommodate and will be practical. But what if you just can't make money with a small number of people you can bring into your restaurant and you can't modify in any possible way?
Yeah.
How are we going to get through all that? I don't know.
We saw info from 2 different surveys, one from Facebook and one from the ACF. The Facebook one said that the very first thing people want to do when things go back to normal, which I think is a weird way to phrase the question, but okay, was go out to dinner. And then the ACF, we were like, that's amazing, that's great, that's what we want to hear. And then the ACF furthered that research to show that it was single millennial men who would be first, and families with children. Those would be the first people who felt it was, they had the lowest, or would be the first adapters coming back to the restaurant and what that means for them. And so we got to thinking, if you are a restaurant and you want to come back and you haven't thought of doing a takeaway meal, or you haven't thought of sort of doing something that competes with Blue Apron, where you're putting together the experience that folks are taking at home, it may be a longer road for you to when you're able to open, because the rules are set to stay in place until likely October-ish as it relates to social distancing, which, then how do you get your waiter to take at what point does it become too systematically impossible to execute, and you're not giving the experience that people missed anymore, right? Because there's not that warmth and that sort of personal connection. So keeping that in mind as you're making your plans as well. We are running short on time, so I want to make sure that we get to just 2 more things. We've talked about writing your congressman, and we've got the toolkit there to help folks do that. We've seen a lot of protesters out there lately, and I'm not sure how effective that is. It was very effective in North Carolina with having the leader of that protest get the virus, and so that's unfortunate, of course, but we could have seen that coming. In Michigan, there was a very notable national protest, and the 2 things that they wanted to bring back the most seemed like elective surgery and construction. And now the governor is opening, allowing construction as of May 7th. So do you think that protests are effective, given they were able to push that through, or is there a better way?
Well, I think many of those protests that were all about reopening the government, and people were showing up without masks or being careful about it, but also, sometimes you just see legions of people showing up with guns and sort of like venting a bigger feeling of, I hate government and why are you here? And I think a lot of that was, it wasn't sort of like organically generated. It was a little bit of an orchestrated sort of anti-government thing. And to my understanding, it represents a fairly small minority when you actually poll people who feel that they're safer if we stay shut down, or they want some kind of gradual reopening. Now, interestingly, advocating for elective surgery and construction is not such a bad idea. And as you're seeing these tiered openings, elective surgery is a critical part of getting our hospitals back in a safe shape. And frankly, it's not a bad idea for hospitals to be able to do that if they can do it safely and still have the capacity for people who might come in with COVID-19. So that's a real problem. And I understand why people feel that way. And I think many states are looking to do that. And also construction, I think one of the problems people had in states like Michigan or other states who had a complete closure of like home and garden stores and hardware stores, it wasn't only construction, it was that people, they wanted to do those do-it-yourself projects that people have time to do when they're at home. And, our state continued to have those things open, and a lot of people were planting gardens and doing other things. So some of that was just sort of like a learning curve about what people miss the most and what you can figure out a safe way to do it, because just getting your supplies to plant a garden and then being able to run home and do it is no less safe than going to the grocery store and then running home to cook. So anyway, I think that's possible. Now, the idea of protest in general, I'm a huge believer. I'm old enough that I grew up in the anti-Vietnam War protests. And so like, I'm all about, you can change the world by showing up. We're not gonna be able to show up in the same ways, but I do think the idea of protest, of making your voice heard, is somewhat different now. Sometimes if you can't go out on the streets and just march, 1 million people at a time, but we've seen a lot about what happens around brand loyalty and sort of calling out, interestingly, just, this PPP program that was meant to be for everybody. And I know we've been very vocal, it didn't work for every restaurant, but, that said, we saw a lot of the big chains get it and other people not even be able to get in line because their bank wasn't eligible, or, all the problems that people had. And I think what really turned some of that around was people finding out, oh my goodness, these big chain restaurants, and I apologize to anybody who works in one, but maybe had better access to cash in other ways or could get the capital, yet still got these federal benefits, and I didn't, if you're somebody who didn't. Consumer attention to that and sort of saying like, well, I'm not going to your restaurant anymore, as all of us know, is it's the biggest fear of every restaurateur, that there'll be a protest against you because you did something that upsets the public. But in understanding what that is, whether it's a food supplier or it's a restaurant or it's something else, that kind of protest I think can be really, really beneficial because it spreads the information. Often it's online, and as long as it's true, it lets consumers know like, hey, wait a minute, they're not sourcing their potatoes locally and they could be buying them down the road. Why don't you go to this other restaurant because they're doing everything they can to support, local farmers or, local markets, or they're doing, really good things by, sharing food with hospital workers as well as opening their restaurant to take out. So, I think there's a different kind of awareness that we can have of those things now, and then people can really express it with their pocketbooks or with a kind of protest that shows, you care about the integrity of what you buy or where you go and of how people do their business.
Yeah, absolutely. We have the food journalists on saying the same thing. There are eyes on every single company and how they're acting right now, how you treated your people, how you treated your community, how you showed up in the world. And granted, not everybody has the same resources to do, the big moves like feeding hospitals and whatnot, but it has to do with like, how much did you care about your staff? Did you were you a good person to the best of your ability during this time? And people are going to remember that. So with our last 4 minutes here, I want to start with Chef and say, if you had one takeaway that this audience would take with them until the next time that we're lucky enough to have you on, what would it be? What would be your one final thought?
I think it gets back to what we all can be doing right now, which is hard as chefs are pivoting and figuring out how to keep a business, to ask them to do one more thing. But I think that it does come back to all those eyes on your business and what you're doing. I mean, chefs, like Representative was saying, we made Brussels sprouts cool. So, calling your congressperson or, getting people to bark at a larger grocery chain to say, what else can you source locally? How can you help with packaging to mitigate this waste? Things like that. I think that people are looking for direction, and chefs are historically very good at refocusing a mishmash of people towards goals and making them achievable. And I think that everyone can do that. And it can both be a soft power and a hard power. And I think that, short of being able to touch tables and get people to care about the food that they're eating in your restaurant, I think you can do that in a number of ways. And sometimes it's by what you choose to supply and the battles that you're choosing to fight. And so, even if it's not being able to go out and feed every hospital, there is still power in those daily actions. And so just don't stop.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And Representative, what's the one thing that you hope this audience takes away from today?
Well, I hope that you all just keep in mind that you are an extreme, for everyone who's a chef, owns a restaurant, or is a farmer on this call, you are just an incredibly trusted source of information. Everybody loves their local restaurants. You're not seen as particularly political, like belonging to one party or the other. You probably have people of all political stripes who come into your restaurant and really respect you. And also everybody understands how hard you work and how difficult it is. And in this time more than ever, we understand that. So kind of back to this point of whether it's calling your congressperson or sharing your story in other ways, this is the best possible moment for everyone to understand through your eyes, what it's like to lay off your workers or what it's like to try to scrape by just doing takeout food. I don't know how many people sent me the New York Times story from the owner of Prune, who, kind of went through every detail of what it's like to shut down your restaurant, the heartbreak, the financial challenge. And, that's the New York Times, but you've got a local paper or you've got your own Facebook page, or just your stories and your credible information right now will give us better insights into what's wrong with the food system or the employment system or the immigration system or our social safety network. You're in the middle of all of it, and you're just so trusted. So, whatever you choose to do with that, from calling your congressperson to deciding who your new suppliers will be and how you convey that information to your customers, you guys are the best. So you got to hear it.
They are the community that made Brussels sprouts cool, and nothing can stop you now. You know what we're going to make cool next? Respirators and PPE and the new hospitality experience. Face masks. We're gonna make them. We're gonna get the oil-free ones that are like no vent. We're gonna be leading what it means to be a good human and what it means to be a leader during this time, and what it means to feed people who are at their most in need right now. Whether that's a need for community or that's a need for actual food, we are always the ones who end up coming down to figuring it out. And thanks to folks like Representative Pingree, we get a voice and a seat at the table in Washington, and that makes a huge difference. So I'm going to give out the website one more time. It's jamesbeard.org/relief. That's where you'll find the Chef Action Toolkit. It's where you'll find updates on policy, webinars that are coming out, conversations that we're having, organizations that are looking for chefs to join up with them to continue this work, and generally just like what we're up to over here. It's been just a crazy time, and we're all doing this together. Every one of us gets on these calls and then sort of like lays down and looks at our foot for an hour and is like, okay, what do we do now? And then we do the next good thing. So I encourage you all to just do what you can, do the next good thing, to quote Frozen 2, which we've been watching a lot of, and I'm sure a lot of people have.
Who doesn't?
It's the best advice you could possibly get. Do the next good thing and let it go. So Chef Abra, thank you for being here. Representative Pingree, thank you again. Thank you to everyone who joined us on the webinar today. Tomorrow we have the Lee Foundation talking about the relief kitchens, and on Friday we have MoFad talking about African American Making America's Table, the history of African American contributions to America's culinary present. And so we've got two powerhouse webinars to follow up this incredible conversation. We hope that you'll stay with us. So thank you again. We'll see you all, and bye.
Bye.
Bye.